Let's do a quick video on how to dimension your floor plan, how to lay out grids, and then how to print. So in this example that I had posted on Moodle, I have a dimension floor plan that I had done for my building. And as you can see, all of the lines are clean and out away from the building and easily readable. So the idea is that there's a contractor who is out there with a tape measure and will need to actually lay all of this stuff out, and so you'd want to have it as clean and neat as possible with dimensions that are within 1/8 or 1/16 as the smallest dimension. They're not going to lay out to 30 seconds. So how do we get your plan from where it is now to having dimensions and these grids? Also notice how the grids, I have grids for this garage, but I did not carry them all the way through so that the grids do not appear on this side, because if you're on this side of the building you don't necessarily need grids to mark this corner because it's on this side. So that's one thing to think about. If you have grids that go all the way through, you don't and if there's nothing that marks them on either side, you don't necessarily need them. As you can see, I have this wall that is continuous all the way through. So I have a grid because this wall, as we follow it up, makes up this corner and is continuous all the way down to the other side of the building. So maybe that grid line would be important for this project. And really, this exercise in grids, they might not have grids on a small residential project, but just to get you used to being able to lay out grids and understand what they're for and how they work. So in our floor plan, I'm going to actually just blow away all of these dimensions. So in order to kill all these dimensions in this sheet or delete them, you can select any row of dimensions, right click, select all instances, and you'd want to do visible in view, not visible in project, because if you did it in visible in project or an entire project, it would delete all of your dimensions. So here, selected those dimensions, and then I can delete. So what it's telling me here is that if I had a dimension that has an equal constraints, that it will it's taking that constraint off. But if I hit OK, I can leave the elements constrained. So for example, let's find where I had my equal dimensions. So all of these windows, I drew a dimension from the face of the finish here to the face of finish to the center of this window. And when you place a dimension, it will give you an option, as you can see above here, to select this little equal that's crossed out. If you were to pick that, it constrains that dimension. So if I were to try to move this window, it's going to ask, hey, this is constrained equal. I'm assuming your SolidWorks or your Inventor is the same way, that you can apply constraints, and so that's what this is doing and telling me. So when I go to delete this dimension, it's asking, hey, these dimensions were constrained. Do you want to keep them constrained, or you can unconstrain them? So now if I were to hit OK, even though I deleted the dimensions, it's left that constraint on there, but it's invisible. So if I try to move this window by selecting it, and as you can see, the little move tool pops up, and then I can move it, and it's going to tell me they're constrained. Now, in order to remove the constraint, all you have to do, instead of hitting cancel, would just hit remove constraint, and now you can move it back anywhere you want. So I'm going to hit undo up here at the top. The undo also, in Revit, you can see that there's a little arrow next to it. So if you hit the little arrow, it will actually highlight the amount of what you can undo. So I could undo all the way back to the beginning and to the last time you saved. So if you've saved, it will not undo past a save point. And so here I'm going to undo all the way back to this toggle equal. And now I got it back. And as you can see, you can do the same thing on the redo. Next to the redo is you can redo all of those. So the little arrow here and on here on either side of the redo and undo will give you an option to go back further. So I'm going to select the dimensions and I'm going to right click, select all instances visible in view, and then I'm just going to hit delete. I believe you can right click. Can you right click and delete? You can. So you could right click and delete also, or press your delete button. And because I don't want all those windows to be constrained without having the dimension there, I'm going to hit unconstrain. So now I've got no dimensions. Didn't delete this angle dimension because it looks at it like a different type of dimension. So if you were to go up to annotate, it's going to delete based on these different types of dimensions. So a line dimension versus a linear dimension versus an angular dimension, and so on. It will treat those as separate. So I only had one angular dimension, so I'll pick that, right click, or hit delete. So I'll zoom out, and as you can see, the crop view is on this view because I've cropped out everything that's outside of this box so it fits nicely on my sheet. I pulled it in so that it's not, it's not so far out, so it's a title block, but it's not too close to the building either. So I'm going to just uncheck the crop region visible in the properties palette. That's over here on the left, or wherever you have your properties palette, about halfway down, or a little like a 2/3 down from the top. So uncheck that, and the crop region will go away. Now you can go up here, pick a line dimension, or you can pick a linear dimension. I'll pick a line dimension, and the first dimension string I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this first corner, which would be my face of stud where my grid is at, and I'm going to drag it all the way over by pushing down the middle mouse button and panning, so I can pan all the way over to this last grid, which is the face of stud for my garage. And so now I've got an overall dimension of 75 foot 9.5. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here back to the first grid dimension, grid 1, and I'm going to dimension each grid. So I'll pick this first grid to the second grid, and unlike AutoCAD, Revit keeps your dimension going, so it's automatically dim continue if you're familiar with AutoCAD, and so it allows you to move it, and then they also stay together. So this dimension string will be connected together, and I zoom in and grab just by rolling the mouse wheel, zoom in so I can see where I'm picking, and then as you can see is if I'm moving it, you can kind of see it snap to where it wants to, where it thinks it needs to be aligned to, so that you have a nice evenly stacked dimensions. So the next dimension, I'm going to go now and snap to that first grid again, and I'm going to snap to the center of the window, and then I'm going to snap to this grid. Your dimension should never pass a grid without snapping to it, except for certain situations. Obviously this overall dimension, we'd pass the grid because we're giving the overall. In this case, we're going to give this dimension, we're going to we're going to snap this dimension. As you can see, it wants to snap there, but the tick would be in the text here. So I'm just going to move it up a bit further, and then pick. Now I've got my dimension to this window. So a contractor will take his tape, run it from here to here, and then he can determine where that window is. So that's 6'4¾". Now that we've placed this dimension, these dimensions, if you were to pick it and then hover over any part of the dimension, and you'll get this little move symbol. You can click and drag that anywhere to relocate. You can also use your arrow keys to bump a dimension. So I'm moving with the dimension with the arrow keys. So let's get that placed. And to add another string, so instead of creating a new dimension by going and picking a line and starting a new string, because it won't be attached to this string, which there might be situations where you want to do that, but in this case I want my dimension strings to go all the way across, so I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to pick this dimension and I'm going to say edit witness line. When you pick any object in Revit, it's going to bring up different commands for each that are available in the modify bar. So the modify gives you the typical modified tab palette, and then they'll give you these additional modifiers for whatever element that you're selecting. For a grid or for a dimension, you can see we have this label, which we won't use right now, and we have this edit witness line. If you hover over and leave it, it shows you how you can then add additional dimension strings to an existing dimension line. See, this starts with overall dimension, and he added a dimension there. He or she added a dimension there for the window opening. So I'm going to click edit witness line and start picking the center. As you can see, when I hover over any element, it's going to try to snap to the part of the element, either the face of finish, the center of the wall. Most of the windows should have a center that you'll see it highlight to. And if you hover over where you're going to snap to, it will actually tell you. You can see the little pop-up there that says Windows sliding double 60 by 60, center left right, and center left right. So that means that you're snapping to the center point of that window. If you're hovering over a jam, you will get a different option. So now it's telling you that you've got a left part of that window. If you were to hit tab, the tab button, you can toggle through available dimension points. So here it's saying that you can dimension to the wall jam there. So we'll just go dimension to the center of our windows, and just keep going down the road here. Center, and I can pick as many times as I want. If I accidentally pick a point that I don't want, say I pick that jam, if you hover over that again while you're still in this dimension string, you can click again and that dimension will go away. That makes sense? So if I hover over a jam, now you might come into a problem where you've snapped too many times, or you've snapped to different elements and now you've got this 0. It's because you've snapped two dimensions to the same location but to two different elements. To get rid of these, if you've kind of messed up your dimension, which happens often when you're dimensioning in Revit, you can delete this string here and then start over again. So obviously you could go up to this edit witness line and try to snap again to try to get rid of all these dimensions, but as you can see, because I'm snapping to that window, it's still leaving the dimension string to the wall jam. So I'd have to try to toggle through and pick that. But I'll show you what to do if you can't get that to change and you've snapped to multiple places that are actually located in the same place. If you highlight your dimension, you can hit tab once over the dimension you want to delete, pick, and then hit delete, or right click, delete. Now it's left this loner dimension over here, and then we can just right click and delete. We can go back to our dimension, edit witness line, and then continue dimensioning our floor plan here. And we'll dimension all the way to that grid. We can keep going down here and dimension these windows that are on the garage, and then finish at the very last grid. And as you can see, after you're done, you can pick anywhere. So once you're done, you can just pick in a blank space. Now if you're done, so let's say you pick these windows, if you were to hit escape, it will also finish off your dimension here. And actually I think that's wrong. Let me do that again, because I think that it was just reverting back to what it was originally. So if I pick here, let's add these dimensions. If I were to hit escape, yeah, it's just going to go back to what it was before. So let's pick the dimension, hit edit witness line, pick, hit your last grid, and let's see. It doesn't appear to be a in dimension command. I usually just pick off into space, and it leaves your dimension here. So that's our first string of dimensions. And so you would want to go around and do that to all of the building. So this side, give your overall dimensions, give your overall dimensions across here. As you notice, I held these grids back. In order to do that, if I were to want to keep these grids back, then I would need to pick the grid, uncheck the box here to show that grid, and then uncheck this lock, because it's at the moment it was locked with this other grid, and so I'd want to take that off so I can move it independently of the grids. Now this grid shows up in both locations. So if you were on this view, you would see this corner, and if you were on this view, you would see this corner as well. So that's how I kind of place my grids, usually based on where they're visible. Oops. You see I grab this circle, the hollow circle, not the little circle, and move it out here, and it will automatically lock, and then you can turn that grid bubble on the outside by checking that box. And so I think the last thing we'll cover here in the last few minutes is dimensioning these non-consistent or this is not a straight wall, and there's some, if you have jogs in your building, you probably don't want to add a grid for every corner. So what you would do is on this side you would add your overall dimension, you would add your grid to grid, which is giving them their kind of outside corners. You'd start with your windows, and for this one I would probably want to dimension from this grid to the corner, and you can zoom in and see how it brings up that black dot at the intersections there. You would want to pick the corner of the stud to bring that dimension up. So now that we have that string there, and what I'm going to do is then edit the witness line again, since I escaped out of there, and add a dimension to the other corner. So that they can get an idea of how to lay this out. And then when I did the window, I would dimension from this corner on a separate string. And oh, one thing, if you hover over this corner and you're not getting that corner, if you hit tab, it'll toggle through the available dimensions, or the available snapping points. On this one, it is not giving me the that corner, and so if you can't find a corner, then what you might do here, so for me, I'm going to grab another dimension string, and for some reason, because I'm already snapped to something else, it's going to let me snap to that corner. And actually, let's try something else. Let's do this linear dimension up top. So on the annotate linear dimension, let's see if it gives us, no, because I think the linear dimension wants to stay straight. So let's just keep with this align dimension. Sorry for that divergence. Let's just snap to this grid so that it'll give us our dot so that we can snap there. Then I'm going to snap to the center of the window, and then the other corner. And as you can see, if we want to get rid of this other dimension, because we don't need to dimension it twice, while we're still on dimension command, pick the grid and it will disappear. Now, like I said, we don't want any 30-second dimensions. We'd like to keep them all with at least the minimum of a 16th. And I also want this door centered within this 10-foot bay window here. So I'm going to select the dimension. I'm going to come up here and hit equal. Now it will set that window equal between this 10-foot dimension, and then if I unpick, it will tell me that it's 5 feet. And I'm going to leave it at 5 feet. And so you see how the dimensions are stacked up here. I've got overall, grid to grid, then I've got the little bump out, and then the window dimensions below, so that they're all stacked up in a nice orderly fashion. You don't really want dimensions that overlap another. See how this dimension is going over this line here? You don't want that. It's confusing and kind of messy, so we'll bring this string down so that you have these dimensions lined up underneath. So now we can take care of the rest of this wall. So a contractor would know, they'd come over here, they'd start this wall at 2 feet, go over 10 feet, and they'd have those two corners. To give them the dimension for how far this bumps out, we can grab this grid, which is the face of this stud wall. We can zoom in so we can get and tab once. So here we'll tab, get the face of stud, and then we want to tab again to get this face down here. And then this face here, we'll have a grid, but we don't need that grid to continue all the way through. So this would actually, if they laid out and they put marks on the ground on the site that this is grid B, they'll know grid B is the face of the stud, and then they can lay their grid out here. And so the next thing that they'll need, that you can do, so see how this dimension is kind of into that wall? You can pull it out. I'm sorry, we'll go back. You select the grid, the dimension, and it'll give you these little nodes, little round grips, and then if you hover over them, it'll tell you what you can do. So you can move the witness line, you can adjust the gap between the element, and here you can drag the text. So we'll just drag the text out and over, keeping it close so that there's no confusion about where this dimension is. And as you can see, it automatically will generate a little line showing where the text is going to go to. So now we have this wall. I think the last thing that we would need is to go to our annotate and then put an angular dimension on this wall. So see, it brought up your angular. Once you picked any dimension, you can then change what you want. So if you're like went into your align dimension, you could go and change it to diameter if you wanted, or back to angular. So once you've actually picked the dimension tab, it actually will bring up this modify, showing you all the different options you have for dimensions. Let's pick the center of this wall for our first angular dimension, and then we'll pick the center of this this wall that's going east to west, and it'll bring up our angular dimension. As you move around, you can see you can give it the different degrees based on, you know, it may be easier to give them a 135 degree on this side depending on your building, or 45 this way. I'm going to choose to place it in this little cavity nook here, so it seems like it's, to me, pretty obvious that this is this wall to this wall, so they could get this dimension that's 10 foot 2 from the grid over here to this corner, and then they can snap a line for 45, and then now they can lay out this whole little nook by these few dimensions. So you'd want to go through and finish off dimensioning all of your openings, all your windows, keeping in mind that you want to stop at the grids. And here we don't need another string because we have this string up here. There's no openings on this side. And so that's pretty much it for dimensioning. We'll go into dimensioning, changing the dimension styles and adding little settings later on. But for now, just getting your exterior walls dimensioned is all you need for this last week. I'm going to allow you to redo them and turn them in because I didn't have this cleared video before. So let me know if you have any questions or if something isn't working, and then we can go through it. Alright, thank you.